Hello, I am one of the many narrators for Deep Space Story. Writing stories from scratch is never easy. A book is slowly going to be read out about how an royal family sent animals into space, in which a deep space voyage will take 999 years, and a cast of characters are explored by allowing the commissioned artists to design the crew and add different storylines to a never-ending story. The sands of Mars, a part of the ship's internal solid mass in which a driving range is seen from the internal windows from many floors. The naughty Fifi, the talking pin poodle, is an illusionist trickster who helps to get the woken-up crew to work for a 5-year stint. The writer is hoping to have other writers to build upon the theme of a G-rated storyline that has the evil illusionist has teenage groups whom see the new cadets as opportunity to film and send YouTube clips back to Earth for a profit.
My program is displaying a virtual Rottweiler who is copyrighted animated virtual design animal. Many animal virtual speakers are animated tools, used by an human female or male trickster. Licensed user can enter commands in aid of social development gender. My human ancestral software program has offered programmed animal to gauge the crew in becoming better people. Stories based in space and actor workshop were commonly filmed in space. Many TV series sent back to Earth were top of their game. Officer Moore, Cadet Sanders and Cadet Galen are professional crew with cameo parts. Officer Moore is 7 foot, built like a Viking, but maintained well-groomed appearance and blonde hair. The other cadets are Galen, who is Caucasian and his eyes have a defect of a color in one eye. Later he has twin on board who is 5 years older. His eye defect color is the only difference. Both IVF born.
The oddest bunch of heroic oddballs were in the making, ranging from 55 centimeters to 250 centimeters in height and 45 kilograms to a massive 500 kilograms. Their genders were male, female and several individuals both. In space navigating history, the recruitment drive has taken an Earth, Mars, and Moon colonies. Tremendous planning. The terrible human limited resources had forced the interplanetary global magnet companies' operators to activate their deep sleep cargo into active service for men and women for a compulsory 5-year stint in deep space. The space captain was on the brink of terminal fatigue. To adapt the virtual computer's mainframe virtual figure named Fifi, to hypothesize the variables in deep space and take the ship into a hulling massive sleeping space city to safety. The virtual pink poodle toy poodle jumped down its virtual cushion, and farted. Next, it jumped up, and bit the captain. Virtual pink toy poodle jumped down its virtual cushion and farted. Next, it jumped up and bit the captain in the groin, and ran over and in a corner of the commanding base sniffed its own virtual bum. It looked at the captain's fellow staff and growled at all the veteran space crew fiercely, and its form changed into a giant bull mastiff and chased all the frightened personnel out of the command post. Fifi stopped that. The disgusted captain had come back from outside the door and told the red-eyed glowing bull mastiff to sit. Fifi flashed back into a larger breed pink poodle and her eyes were still glowing red. The captain was suddenly flashed in virtual leash, and Fifi's eyes stopped glowing red, and she stood on her toes and walked around the captain and whined. "Is this what you want, Fifi? I'll get one of the officers to give you an walk. I cannot believe you're asking me to walk you." "In the middle of an crisis, I cannot believe you're asking a ship's captain. We have meteorites that are coming directly for us." Fifi barked at the captain and her eyes began to take on a red glow. The captain quickly hesitated and Fifi turned into an Oberon. The captain quickly took the lead and attached it to the virtual collar. Fifi, not an adequate name for a male dog. Lead its captain to the active recruitment officer mess hall and barked orders at the captain to stop. The distraught captain looked at the virtual Doberman and took a running kick at the dog's oversized and growing appendage. And his shoe came off and was thrown off, and he slipped forward and ended up hitting his head on a wall support beam and fall face unconscious down in the giant's officer's goulash on a dining table. Giant blonde office, who was close shaven, extremely tidy, looked down at Fifi and smiled. The distraught captain looked at the virtual Doberman and took an running kick at the guard dog's oversized and male appendages. His shoe flew by, just missing a group sitting at the tables to the far right. He slipped on a virtual banana Fifi had grabbed from the table and dropped earlier to shoe, coming off the acting captain of African and Polynesian descent with robotic arm, where he lost his real arm from an accident years ago, amputated after infection from an outbreak of Mars influenza. Let him stay in bed too long. His tattoo festered into sore under the bandage from an backyard tattooist which had been done 2 weeks earlier. These parts as an ailing captain, where he wore special effects such as the nose and white skin makeup, let him connect to his Guarana Group Union fellow officers with much respect as back on Earth and the other Guarana affiliated moon colonies.
Fifi changed back to a virtual toy pink poodle, jumped up on the chair then the table. Officer Moore took hold of the captain, who'd slipped, got knocked out by a wall beam and landed up against the table with his chest and body slap bang against the surface, his lower body propped like a lifeless man waiting for an rider. Now Fifi had licked the unconscious man's face and managed to position her little pink doggy body to leave a deposit in the pocket of captain, and while virtually pooping into his pocket, let out noises of enjoyment that we know makes us feel good after taking a hard dump in the loo, well, in many cases anyway. The announcer complained about reading the script as a narrator of the Popsy Cola group, who'd been set up by guarana promotion group to look stupid in Expanse TV showing. The favorite viewed show of the last 225 years running. Editor bosses must have been paid off.
The alarm sound brought the medical team, who looked at the captain bent over with Fifi messing in his pants pocket. And her doggy eyes glowed red at the medic who came over after being prompted by film crew. The virtual animal Fifi disappeared and an fishbowl appeared with Fifi the goldfish looking through the glass at the unfolding events. The medic checked the captain and moved him onto the floor in a more comfortable position. Officer Moore was getting annoyed how long the shoot was taking up his personal time and listened to the device in his ear for cues in what to do next. He dismissed the medics quicker, and once the medics were out of gallery dining area, the virtual illusion changed from fishbowl to Little Red Riding Hood at a seated position. The little girl in red hood asked where her basket was. Yawned. Officer Moore said, "Go to bed now. And the captain can too." Make sure the captain brushes his teeth, and the Space City crew are going to wait for the captain to brush his hair and clean his teeth and put on clean uniform and socks, slip on his shoes. And do I have to make myself clearer? Fifi turned back to pink poodle with pom-poms along her tail and one big one on her head. Fifi farted again and the room occupants waited for Fifi to stop, and everyone in the room looked over to Fifi and some of them turned around and Fifi started to fart again. Officer Moore looked around and asked all the occupants to tell Fifi they would also look after the captain. Fifi hesitated and started to stop expanding her small pink doggy bottom to keep growing and making stomach noises. "I cannot hold on forever." Cadet Sanders jumped up and asked Officer Moore permission to speak. "Thank you, sir." "Officer Moore, the kitchen staff are not here."
The filming of the captain's command room and officers' mess hall had been planned to be filmed 8 a.m. that morning when all the officers and captains were at their weekly meeting. Officer Moore had kindly offered to sit on in the filming and a cameo parts were made just for that morning. The filming was by a production team often hired by Fifi the trickster and programmer with refined talented tricks in her department's copyrighted software that allowed Earth corporations to purchase the film and send credits to the operator's company. The footage was filmed and no complications except the mess hall actors and actresses wanted an extra space ration for old jokes about passing wind was now getting on everyone's nerves through a ruse. The time for the staff to go back into deep sleep and another group working to take their place was to happen soon. Not all the personnel would be deep sleeped.
Gold Lions Actors and Actresses Guild's union manager was on floor 2345 M9ZS. Every 5 years the new representative is appointed from list given to the captain's vault computer's receptionist and uploaded. The failing to request filming request with virtual images of children under 16 for Lion Acting Guild members was not taken lightly, as dinner credit finds way hard to recover from every member's corporate sponsor. When personally fined for not reading the voyage contract's fine print. Different guilds were listed in the captain's vault computer, in which every Woken personnel was read their expanse rights and signed and form that it was read out and recorded for vault files. Fifi the Trickster Union was the Guarana Actors and Actress Guild in which many talented people were multitasked in many different fields. This Fifi the Pink Poodle virtual animal was also an political tool.
This Fifi the Pink Poodle virtual animal was also an political tool used to entertain the expanse. Now Fifi changes into Little Red Riding Hood and her basket also appeared. And she went around the gallery dinner tables and gave out virtual flowers in vases. The flower arrangement in each area where people were sitting and eating their dinner began to make noise that sounded like hills of cicadas. The insects appeared from the flower arrangement and flew back to Little Red Riding Hood's basket and disappeared inside. The Little Red Riding Hood girl virtual image that was aged around 7 put her hand in the basket and then suddenly stuffed cicada after cicada into her mouth. It was grotesque as Little Red Riding Hood went to every table and asked people to let her have a drink to wash down the food. Her hands could not grab the drink and went through the glass or cup or bottle.
Private Officers' Quarters was Officer Moore's private oasis. Here no grandstanding allowed. It was very comfortable. The filming of the Fifi Illusionist had made it difficult to gain ground. The ambition of his guild, to buy land in the New World, by leaving encrypted messages, to voice word how the deep space voyage clicked, gave Officer Moore a plan to increase the community population as planned. With some exceptions now, as the children staged an coup d'etat years earlier and writes, shipborne political policies corrected, which meant his plans changed. His fellow guild members would reconnect over the expanse, leaving messages how they encouraged the children to live for 5 years on their own floor. Officer Moore's guild was the Viking Reenactment Guild, an environment-friendly group. The ability to create generations of working, family-orientated community was his turn to intervene.
Cadet Sanders jumped up and asked Officer Moore permission to speak. "Sir, thank you, sir." Officer Moore, "The kitchen staff are not here. May we ask them to come into the mess hall?" Permission to end speech. Officer Moore, "Yes." Cadet Sander, permission granted, and go into the kitchen now please and tell them to come out. Cadet Sander, permission granted. Fifi's flashed and changed into sweet Little Red Riding Hood again. However, Red Riding Hood was making wind and apologizing to the mess hall again and again. The unconscious captain was being held by Officer Moore over his back like a sack of spuds by now. He put the man down and went into the kitchen, and pots and pans were heard landing on the floors and one came out the door spinning and stopping at Fifi's feet. The kitchen staff came running out and Officer Moore came out with Cadet Sanders with a pair of tongs snapping at him. The kitchen staff came running out and Officer Moore came out with Cadet Sanders with a pair of tongs pulling his ear to move forward. The cadet was stopping and trying not to struggle and picked up Captain and tried to drag Captain out of the room to the sleeping quarters section by himself at first. Then Officer Moore ordered Cadet Galen to help Cadet Sander to carry the Captain by holding the Captain's legs. Soon the pair came back to watch the filming. Fifi the Pink Poodle was eating food in the doggy bowl. It vanished and Fifi said, "That tastes good and smelled delicious. What about your dinner? Did you like the taste?" Officer Moore grabbed his glass and drank the beer left at the bottom of the glass. His hand came out from his pocket and scooped up his personal board panel and tucked the controller under his arm. The officer had people filming his every movement. Fifi asked, "Let me have a drink to wash down the live food." Her hands could not grab the drink and went through the glass or cup, and the more tables she went to the more angrier she got, and her hands began to change into hairy wolf-like arms and hands of an adult. Officer Moore let out a whistle to bring back Little Red Riding Hood back to him from the far table. and he pointed to the beer on his table and she grabbed the drink and it was an virtual one. The little Red Riding Hood figure thanked Officer Moore kindly and asked would anyone mind to give Fifi some of their food on the dinner table. Officer Moore by this time was sitting down and got ready to enjoy his dinner and waitress had just served him. And to people not paying attention, they would have missed it, as an black-clad figure had slipped out from the virtual waitress and hid under Officer Moore's table. Fifi's shadow flashed and virtual image turned into an sweet little child with an Red Riding Hood and a basket. She put the basket on the table and softly subjected for Officer Moore to take the unconscious captain in hand and feed and shower him and put nicely into Grandma's bed. Fifi said in a sweet voice. The cadet Galen at the dining table had heard the voice before and couldn't work out who the voice belonged to just yet. The officer had people watching his movements and he wiped his mouth on a napkin and looked at Fifi and belched. Yes, Fifi. It was delicious. Fifi's eyes glowed red and she scoffed at the officer and told him to stop being stupid as it's a virtual doggy bowl and not a real one. And listen, Fifi, black outfitted and fully clad trickster from head to toe, jumped up and whispered, listen. Fifi jumped up and the trickster positioned the puppet in her pack to whisper loudly so everyone could hear. And Meteorite Field is 7 weeks away and the new deep sleep recruits, part of our human cargo, don't need any type of heroics but only cooperation from the captain and officers to stop arguing and daydreaming and get on with the job we're contracted to carry out for the Guarana Corporation or the other central companies who financed this 999-year trip. Another flash and the trickster had pulled off a trickster-cladding garb, and a plainly dressed woman stood next to Officer Moore with a puppet on her arm. She then made a sawing noise and pretended to cut her arm off and it was green past the elbow now and the fake arm on the floor with the puppet on it still. Cadet Galen was caught off guard as he now knew who the voice he's heard earlier belonged to. The mystery woman that few people had ever seen her real identity, but in the dark while walking through the chamber's halls. He'd been caught off guard and been dropped by this trickster and a second one, whom both had tackled him to the ground and ran off only later to find his personal fort board had been uploaded with information about Guarana Corporation. He had been listening to music plugs into his personal fort panel at the time, and only heard her voice, the Fifi trickster. Maybe bit more than just a handful. Galen thought her breasts would really be. And small group of women murmuring about something to others in the group could be heard from over to the far right. Over 50 people could sit comfortable at the tables at a time. The attention of Fifi was never far away from an ripple effect. The acknowledge of Officer Moore having admirers of the both sexes was well known in this unit. The plainly dressed Fifi pulled off her mask and put another mask on, and a glimpse of this trickster allowed Galen for the first glimpse to see this female and mixture of Japanese perhaps and Caucasian. Fifi blonde hair was uncovered from the beanie, and she leant into Officer Moore. And like a cat stretching she pulled the chair from under Officer Moore and he grabbed the table, and it moved over from its fixed position and broke off the floor.
The regards to sharing your rations was the only thing everyone on board knew was the worst thing to do, as people would hold grudges for long time to those who pilfered. The tension was taken out of the mess hall when onlookers wanted to know what Fifi the trickster would do with the tray. Fifi was fiddling with her lipstick and mascara and indescribably rolled them off the table, and the noise made the cadets stop what they were doing. Officer Moore threw an orange each at the cadets and asked them to hurry up. When the food was collected from 10 tables, the range of food was healthy to just strange and to some uneatable. Insects were the latest craze. The cook's galley had curried grasshoppers as the main meal most days. Officer Moore gave orders to cadets to take the food to captain's cabin and knock on the door. and stand guard till Officer Moore came by. And stand guard till he releases the cadets, as the food tray was not allowed to be taken out of the gallery. And if it was lost, the cost to the person responsible for moving the tray would be charged in large replacement fee. The Pink Boodle was an program developer trickster who was a member of the Guarana group. This group, back on Earth where the top seller of guarana drinks and moon colonies were owned by the guarana companies, the drink wars were about companies owning property in space and virtual space. On the Space Traveler's Eyewear contacts, you would look out the cabin and see adverts in space of guarana advertisers and affiliated sites on moon colonies. In space it was known as the popsy and guarana wars, where the software was owned by major corporations and has to share the space advertising spots. Billboards were seen looking out the windows with daily scenes.
The Guarana Corporation founder Mr. Le virtual sponsor at Zion, the spokesman here today to welcome everyone to the new product opening new to the market fortboard K40258JS Model 18 is a gambling fortboard components bag with series of items made from KD white plastic under license. The Space Voyage on-board contractors sells lines of boards and carries out and manufacture components program with ease. The manufacture cost of game components is speed over the game components, marbles, chess figures, sticks, plastic tubes and plastic tube flags. Update board is extra. The special extra is an offering bowl and reproduction piece from the Ming Dynasty, left parenthesis, a bowl made on Earth between 1368 and 1644. The gambling practice of fortboard has been tracked back to Earth period 2010 and 2020. The offering bowl allowed forfeited game components to be won. Was introduced by the Mars miners in 2389.
After the film crew left the gallery, Officer Moore was handed the food tray and rations that had been sent over to Luther's private quarters. The cadets under his charge were also invited, and Luther took the opportunity to get changed from captain's uniform. All the men decided to not catch ride there but walk together, chaperoning some art children that also wanted to come to party. Duties over, as his task was to place the tray back into the cabinet. Once the food had been donated to an pregnant woman's dormitory section on the Ark. An after party in the Spanish section, where the film crew and gallery civilians had gone to. Tomorrow the rest of the filming would take place again. His commander had asked him and two cadets to join in again. And small group of women murmuring about something to others in the group could be heard from over to the far right. Over 50 people could sit comfortable at the tables at a time. The attention of Fifi was never far away from an ripple effect. The acknowledgement of Officer Moore having admirers of the both sexes was well known in this unit. The plainly dressed Fifi pulled off her mask and put another mask on, and a glimpse of this trickster allowed Galen for the first glimpse to see this female and mixture of Japanese perhaps and Caucasian. Fifi blonde hair was uncovered from the beanie, and she leant into Officer Moore. And like a cat stretching, she pulled the chair from under Officer Moore and he grabbed the table, and it moved over from its fixed position and broke off the floor. Fifi heard silence then and took out the small booty makeup bag connected to her belt hanging loosely. It was there a few moments before the table moved, but Galen had seen her pluck it from her backpack and she'd put it in her pocket. Now it was on her belt and she took out the lipstick and mascara, put it on the table. And her green painted arm she put the makeup on her facial mask. And Officer Moore looked around to see the group watching him. Put his arms together and crunched his back to show no harm, and moved in a dipping motion from one side to the other. The type of movement men do when relaxing their back muscles, I suppose. Officer Moore called Cadet Galen and Cadet Sanders over and asked them to do a little job for him. Go and fetch an food tray and take a spoonful of food and give it to Fifi. Trickster. The regards to sharing your rations was the only thing everyone on board knew was the worst thing to do, as people would hold grudges for a long time to those who pilfered. The tension was taken out of the mess hall when onlookers wanted to know what Fifi the trickster would do with the tray. Fifi was fiddling with her lipstick and mascara and indescribably pushed and rolled several items off the table. And the noise made the cadets stop what they were doing, offer more through her orangey chat the cadets and asked them to hurry up. Last night they had been invited back to Captain Degas for an private dinner invitation. Cadet Sanders' cousin Warden Myers had invited Zoe Chan to come as well.
Fifi and her merry men and women were traveling across the universe. Shakespeare once said, to know or not to know, we're all a bunch of oddball crew members seeming our way to gamble with our ye old fort boards from the rich and bugger the poor. We're keeping the stack for ourselves. Fifi and her merry men and women were traveling across the universe. The wary traveler better beware, or Fifi will steal fire smarts for our trickster. Fifi program is fabulous and mad. Put away your silver, put away your marbles and coin. We're making a mad dash across the expanse, filming clips to send back to old Earth.
This Reddit Punget virtual giant insect running over the surface on the outside arc. This site put on for the viewers inside the Deep Space Voyager nicknamed the Ark of Nowhere. The Ark for Shell mascot was fighting the Wetapunga regulation stipulated you could display for Shell fighting creatures outside the ship on special occasions. The joining navigation craft happened to be owned by the Kia group of companies, and its away cruise duo inhabitants was an half-ton giant Prince cube with inhabitant and a little Marsman who would have weighed that 45 kilograms. The rest of the crew were asleep inside the visiting Kia and cargo ship, and one unknown visitor was deep sleeped in the Prince cube underneath the cube's internal exercise equipment in the underneath storage garage. The system medical Prince cube had to be lifted within crane to the floor. Lift out went to section. The system medical Prince cube was lifted to special section that could cater to an quadriplegic crew member. An iron lung had to be updated inside the Prince cube, and the Marsman wanted to know more about the space trick by taking an electric chair, scooting around the spaceship, where the Wetapunga insect that had been outside in the ship now joined him in his sightseeing adventure. The female, being the other away traveler, had taken many years to get there in high speed within special engine magnetic fusion system. In high-speed chase across the universes to be the first navigation craft within Prince cube built into the ship. To reach the Ark of Nowhere, latest gossip story spread across the ship. After the landing, Hannah team and the medical team completed theater tasks in which some of them had sold the news stories to the Ark's new paper, owned by the Popsy group. The woman nicknamed by media as Beowulf Grendel, actual name was Gwendolyn. The first photo of her tattooed and facial scarred face was splashed across subscribers' board bulletin screens. Her procedure to repair her broken neck had left scars from an accident in the Mars mines, and her descendants' heritage was tracked back to New Zealand, where facial tattooing was the norm for a warrior. Her gambling ability let her invest her payout from the mining accident and buy the navigator and sponsor the workers she hired. The little Mars sidekick I'd expect was cheap to feed and deep sleep, and gossip about the sexual preference partners was right news spread around the Ark. The head deep sleep person under Gwendolyn was later known to be a female. The nicknames the Kia was navigational human cargo spaceship, and our ship's true owner's Asian Martha was covered up from media. The deep sleep crew that Gwendolyn had hired on Mars were environment systems engineers, medical specialists, and 2 male cargo passengers, several Asian women, possibly the male cargo's wives. And film crew came to the section where the gambling dens were set up for the guests in a special theme, and the insect races were everyone's favorite. Floor 2, 3, 4, 5, 0, 0, 8, as brought entertainers with their lions and tigers, and other smaller cats. The collars on the cat and runners were given an electric charge that would shock the wearer but not hurt them too much. Animal rights activists complained every now and then, but the felines themselves preferred to choose runners with collars, and star cats chose to wear electric zapper collars, while other star animals directed the carers to not. For the virtual runner, being either human or animal would get in shock when the cat caught up to the virtual.
Human or animal would get in shock when the cat caught up to the virtual shadow. Vicaria. And got in shock, but after a while the runners who wore the colors were shown to take more risk than other runners who did not in the past. The cats themselves would fight in virtual shadow in the ring, and became depressed if the ring was closed for more time than expected till the next meet. So the Gladiator Games on the Ark became a special view program in the Expanse, in which funds were set up to buy areas on Earth, natural habitat for the animals back on Earth. The creature known as Grendel lived, and Gwendolyn Prince Cute with her kept everyone interested to know more about the visitors, and the ratings of the Ark of Noah were insect and fighting illusions with the big cats. Gwendolyn and her small worker were amused by the news updates betting of Ford board components on the Ark.
The betting of Ford board components on the Ark could land and visit in ships due earnings to go into their treasure box. For those who don't know about Beowulf, it's a tale where the king makes a deal with a monster king's progeny is born, and the king is doomed to a bad outcome later. What poor traveler woken up on the Ark would lose their life-saving as the tournament would bring Gwendolyn out of her machine and have Eddie Rise act as helper. Mr. Rise would move the game pieces on Gwendolyn command. The funny thing was, no one else knew the commands in an language. The treasure was worth in some. Officer knew about the visitor staying on deck 67T890 B. The plan was made to see what his guild could get out of the gambling duo. He'd have to be careful, as the trickster Fifi black-clad performer did win previous games offering tokens. This could have been an ploy to get people sucked in, as the much wealth made to buy the navigating ship and hiring team must have been made from illegal activity on one of the space colonies outside the Mars system, on a moon perhaps. The trickster Fifi illusionist was sending him board bulletins, and he blocked the user. It had been fun for him while sleeping with the blonde trickster, but he saw another chance to earn some credits. Cadet Galen Road was interested in getting to know the Fifi human trickster now. Would he feel anything if something happened he didn't know? Perhaps. Gwendolyn's sister was safety tucked inside the deep sleep machine in her Prince cube. Gwendolyn's face and neck had been no accident. Deep sleeping after effects were sometimes paranoia and psychotic episodes brought on by stress from the process. Waking her sister would have to be maneuvered very carefully to keep her locked in. Her sister would have to be maneuvered very carefully to keep her locked in the unit till her episodes had finished. Edward had many admirers on the Ark. Women would send him bulletin posts when they could hook up. Edward's dwarfism meant many limitations were placed on him. Gwendolyn admired his charming persona, occasionally giving way to sleeping with him in the Prince cube. He offered to help to maneuver men from time to time into the cube for privacy. Episode outside the Prince cube, there was no privacy, but inside filming could take place, and this is how blackmail had got them this far. Many people in political office would not like a sex clip to get out of them having sexual favors with Gwendolyn, and her injured body and tattooed face. Conservative politicians' wives, children accepted their father's office, and were in the public eye to an point with scandals, but not all of the time. But not all of them would have stayed with their husband after seeing him with Gwendolyn with the rubber ball shown in her mouth. To drop the ball meant to stop the sexual act and stimulation whipping. Behind Gwendolyn and her sister Faith had been the Earth Moon's own Asian mafia in control. The Prince cube had been paid by the outfit to blackmail the rich Mars miners of Fields by getting the men inside to show them that it was 100% private and safe to go in and have sexual favors done. Edward Rise had been contracted to carry out the secret filming, while Faith lured men into the Prince cube. Gwendolyn had already had the accident by the time, and been paid in sum of money by mining giant in which the corporate boss had tried to kill Gwendolyn, thinking it was Faith's wife. Both sisters had been contracted by the mines, and Faith had fallen in love with corporate boss's son. Members of their clan environment area was located and had been sponsored by the particular Asian mafia group. The other contractors were in different load of human cargo, who'd offered to pay MRIs the costs to get them out of the world so the Asian mafia wouldn't find them, except there was two exceptions in the deep sleep capsule's load, as one of the men was Faith's husband and the other her father-in-law. In which both men had no idea they were in space and not coming back to their corporation after serving time being deep sleep. They would be woken up and made to live on the Ark. With no credit or sponsorship, Gwendolyn had promised Faith to not harm the men and always kept her word to be sisters she loved dearly. The prison where the men were locked up had the warden hand over the men in deep sleep condition and agreed to not tell the authorities the whereabouts of the both. Faith had fallen in love with Inmar's corporate boss's son, only to have Gwendolyn injured by Faith's mother-in-law, in which her husband and father-in-law lied about the mother-in-law's whereabouts. Judge sentenced 3 people and told of an mining dump truck being used to dump many tons of rock onto Faith's and Gwendolyn's caravan that Gwendolyn was sleeping in. The mafia leased out the spacecraft to MRIs, Faith and Gwendolyn, for the sum of all their money they had saved from the blackmailing deal. Gwendolyn's Prince Cube was offered in return for securing land deal on a planet they were going to send descendants to. Over 700 years the contract was viable. The deep sleep women in the navigating spacecraft were not wives. They were human cargo contracted by the 3 to deliver all women to the station later. To introduce the women to the floor were members of the Asian clan. After handing over several units of food stores, and this saved the men from the Asian mafia spiking their deep sleep containers and killing them as an contract had been put out. Gwendolyn had a chance to be healed from the accident, which had damaged her spinal column. Staying in the Prince Cube made her feel safe, and Faith, her sister, would be coming around soon from deep sleep. And in her clarity, she knew how to get Faith away from her husband's advances, for the man needed a bit of growing up time on this Ark, and he would be in for a surprise when he would be waking up in the floor 7957. Officer Moore thought he could get the better of Gwendolyn and MRIs. However, plans were in process to make MR the object of her desire, and Faith's surprising to see how Officer Moore could move away from his guild principles, the joining of minds, to leave this Ark with trio Faith, Edward and Gwen.
The treasure item that went up to monthly auction was a shrunken head with other items in makeshift bird's nest. The antique piece was to be DNA tested, and if any descendants claimed the piece, the inmate who found the artifact vowed possibly more credits to his name. It was funny how the head was stitched into drawer and taped to the drawers underneath. The practice of shrunken heads was cultural practice on Earth, and came back into forbidden practice in the era after the Ark left port. The person whose head was detached after death must have done something to upset one of the Moon or Mars colony's mafia groups. The scientist said the artifact was from a white female around 50. Later the DNA matched the younger prisoner who had come with Gwendolyn and her crew in the ship captain's vault. Dialware case files connecting the artifact to war-scifi of the Ark. Apparently his stepdaughter DNA matched. The news story about the shrunken head, connected to the war-scifi and to the prisoner on Maya's floor, rang alarm bells for the shipborne leader of the Ark's medieval illusionist gang. His group were paid for board game components to deliver this head to the section where inmates were removing the Art Deco designs. As the period of Art Deco was old now, and the next theme would be chosen by ship's lotto entry winner, the Marquis would be released from prison. It was a matter of time, for the gossip on the ship was that the head was the wife and mother of the 2 new inmates, and the judge was notified that the stepdaughter had killed the infant. The judge by Board of Appeal would be released in time. The message of the item being found was an obvious ploy to send some sort of message that his period of freedom was going to end soon. The message to Fine and Driver of the docked. The credit for finding the bird's nest and mix of Ark junk objects were given over to the floor team. The inmates were given a choice to help with tooling of the new floor's theme, or to work with the program, developed by the trickster Zoe-chan, to construct housing units for the new world, and to organize the biomatter to manufacture the model casts, in which will be filled with liquid that turns solid under reduced room temperature. The modules made were invented by Zoe Chan to surprise her friend Officer Moore. He's been more and more reserved the closer to his time to be deep sleeped after conscription time ended. This discovery of programming and bird's nest was new technical developments in the Earth's housing programs. Gave Fifi Trickster some time to redevelop and program she's been working on in her quarters. The idea came to her when her artificial foot needed some modification.
GH.
Captain's Promenade Floor Piso de la Promenade de los Capitanes. Officer Moore thanked the Spanish immigration's attendant. He entered the entrance for the Captain's Promenade, on the Arc South zone. Captain Diego permitted on his watch, to enter SE. Captain waved his hand and started to chat to an Omega officer. Hala Moore del official Puto le Fresco una bebida de la zafada. Translate. Hello Officer Moore. Can I offer you a drink from the stewardess? Will speak in English now as the floor you direct is from the English section. Speakers only. I expect have been informed you speak several languages, and you're fluent in Old Earth dialects. But they limited you from being an officer on the Alpha sections above your floor. It seems we have a mutual friend. Zoe Chen, my stewardess, was telling me that she has a surprise for us. Let's go for a ride, and pair exited to an lady boy's cab waiting. Lady boy driver acknowledged the orders and waved goodbye to the other cabs in line. He got in the harness and started pedaling to the downsloping floor entrance. Tominus para Solar 4873. Officer Moore had admirers from a few of the lady boy cab drivers, waving at Officer Moore and giving him a kiss in the air. Goodbye. The Spanish section area captain laughed at the Officer Moore's embarrassment, and let out and whistle as the other Spanish personnel were getting in the cab to follow their commander. The ride took the passengers and lady boy cab drivers past the forbidden floor, in which the inhabitants would have not taken the tourist, as that's what the insiders called them. They were the equivalent of Earth's organized mafia put in a bottle. The feared sleepers, whom controlled the masses, by acts of violence on Mars, in 23rd century. The Mars mine profiteers were aboard. Captain Diego understood people as simple creatures that needed love. He organized parties on board, where he brought illegal alcohol and spiked the punch from time to time. No one was going to complain, as the reputation of the gang in the Forbidden City, where not a group you messed with or even spoke about. The Navy aboard the Ark, where token captains for the trip into space took a more serious approach to personnel, when coming to the end of the trip. The trips that the small navigating crafts took from the Ark docking bay, were small missions to send seed stock to the New World. Small pods were fired out of the navigator to make their way to the planet alone, spreading many plants and grasses that could feed the Ark's population in the future. Officer Moore future plan he dreamed about, to be an harvest worker that stayed on the planet, processing minerals and food for the group. Officer Moore was welcomed by the group, who had already gave Captain Diego a kiss on his cheek and hug from everyone in the lounge area. The newly fitted floor was set out designs of cut tiles, in which he stepped into the ring outdoor seating, where an audience were sitting and waiting for the first contenders. The Spanish section were known for doing many events that would have been banned on other floors. An bull came out, and behind the bull, two women came running behind, only dressed in a thong. Each one exception was an artificial leg was on one of the women's lower limbs. The Captain Diego seated next to him explained the reenactment was to do with an old Earth fresco. Moore ordered an beer and watched the bull roam around the below platform. The active woman flipping past, an angry bull, amazed the crowd. Captain Diego laughed at the crowd and patted Officer Moore on the back. Cadet Sanders and Cadet Galen, you two get dressed. Officer Moore gave the two younger men time to get ready. The room the two men shared had been Officer Moore's room 18 months ago. Before he got an promotion in life was simple then. He had passed the on-board exams to get to this point where he was now. His private life was not so private anymore since going out with Zoe Chen. Their dates had been very brief, and it surprised him to see Zoe with an artificial leg attachment. Sanders was a friend of Zoe, in which he insisted Galen to back off the subject. About him introducing Zoe to him, as Officer Moore was going out with her. This is what annoyed Officer Moore the most, as Spanish captain had set it up. Spiking the drinks at one of his parties that Zoe attended with her guild actors, swearing blindly she was going to help him become an harvester. They would share and base together one day. Officer Moore gave the two cadets in fighting class. That lasted too long. The inner turmoil made him direct his anger to take it out on the two men. The lads were sweating out, and Sanders had passed out, in which the medical team came by, and his uncle intervened. Bob Myers took Officer Moore out for drinks that night. They caught in Lady Boykin to one of the bars managed by Forbidden City members. Officer Moore had told Myers about the problem with Zoe Chen. He wanted to wear the pants in the relationship, and didn't want to be splashed all over the fort board bulletins about his private life. Bob Myers likes Zoe, and told Officer Moore to see it from her side. She had not been as lucky as Moore, and her need to be part of an family was what gave her strength to be one of the best Fifi illusionists. Her risk-taking in the ring was earning her credits to make her own agenda come true.
Scary stories were told to an audience on the Ark. The twins, known by Fifi as the Hodge twins, were two citizens that narrated YouTube clips. In the year 3012, the brothers were usually talking about other YouTube clips that were just plain strange. The urban legend about the disappearance of the Hodge brothers made news headlines across the station. The twins were in their late 20s to early 30s of African and American descent. Way back in, Collector had spotted the pair on national expense-free television internet broadcast. For the people in the group who haven't heard about the Collector terminology, it's an person or persons, even known to be in black market company, that finds people in their homes or workplace or at private public area, takes the person to an illegal deep sleep depot drop-off area, in which they are placed into storage for an human collector's vault. The naughty Fifi was behind a screen that showed silhouettes of the Hodge brothers. Laughing, the audience group took their cues and asked the illusionist trickster about the urban legend. The people behind the screen moved around, changing position with each projected picture that went on the screen. Between an stage and the captivated audience seating area, the brothers were sitting in front of a computer camera, preening as usual, taking turns to the lead and chat about anything that came to mind on any subject. The Collector came out of the audience and pointed to the screen, saying, "Mine. Precious, give me, give me." The crowd laughed as the Hodge brothers appeared to be running around, while the Collector appeared on the silhouette and took out a large needle and jabbed both of the brothers. The audience were interested in what the dancers behind the screen were staging.
Deep sleeping technology brought in new types of criminals who would kidnap people. Some of the bizarre cases were parents who deep sleep the children when they turned 18, as they did not want to have the financial stress when they could be raising more children. Mothers and fathers in other cases were united with their daughters, who run away and were frozen for 50 years. Laws started to change when people known as the Collectors began to be in the news more frequent. Whole company director board members were stolen and sent to moon colonies. Even in few town communities were deep slept and found in human storage depots. The Hodge brothers came across stories and narrated live on the Expanse News about if they were in Collector, they would have stored their wives by now and moved on to the next wife, till they stored those wives. They were hilarious to listen to, 5 stars. The twins were an hit to impersonate, and over the expanse the Ark had many talented twins, pretending to be the Hodge twins. The Forbidden City where the Mafia were kept in storage sometimes was parody for the Ark's impersonators, telling the shipborne children and civilians the Hodge twins were on board and stored in a collector's collection in the Forbidden City. The daily impersonators would launch their preening comedy routine on board the Ark for 5 years or less. It appeared that audiences of the Hodge twins could never get enough of comic routine. When done well about collectors and stories about family reunions, the gifted ability to center on issues that displayed people happy and crying was probably covering up the true feeling of how scared people were on the crime. Collectors could be anyone, any neighbor if you had enough credit. You could make an contract easily.
Floor 905's northern section lockup zone was off limits to most of the Alpha and Omega crew unit members. Getting to the floor you had to pass 3 corridor identity scans. Inside the ship's prison section non-visitors and guard staff were imposed in time lockout by the station's warden. No intruder could gain permission to get an entry pass if the warden chose to reject the request sent by an Ark's fortboard user. 2 deep sleep containers with male occupants were detained at each checkpoint before the warden personally came out and took responsibility for the Mars detainees. The men inside would be read their Ark Vault Miranda rights after the process of removing them from the crib's artificial umbilical cord. The fluid was cleaned of impurities and placed into storage crew unit stored for reuse to be deep sleeped again, or in case of death the fluid was sold on.
A nightmare was unfolding in the prison's medical room. 2 men were being woken up by the warden giving each man a slap in the face, was the tradition to carry out by each new warden given active service in the prison zone. Warden Myers was female around 40, with little emotional connection to the prison zone, other than requesting to serve in the warden's position as in Chief Island. With no prior history of working in prison or police public service industry, Myers passed an entrance exam on Mars Moon Colony, and was accepted. Her number was entered into the vault computer on accepting her deep sleep container. And after many wardens had gone before and later, after her, to walk out of the prison zone or carried in body bags, eventually to be deep sleeped and put into AN containers to be relisted by receptionist as service completed. 1 warden's body was never recovered.
Warden Myers read the executive summary list of actions. Kept her in the offices. 2 prisoners were put in cell. Stated that the men with similar release dated could share in cell. The men would be kept on watch to monitor any deep sleep mental illness. The men seemed to share the same paranoid delusion, and Myers had no time to listen to more ramblings. Just another deep sleep woken prisoner. Her first detail as warden was to slap the men or women awake as in shock. Was meant to bring the person around to check on their mental state. The reaction Myers as newly activated warden kept Warden Myers awake on many a night. The men and women mostly were woken up on board to serve their sentence and not be placed back to die of natural causes was not always the norm, as the Mars miners were in majority on the inmates, and their tough exterior generally meant a tougher mental interior.
Myers' cousin was known as Officer Morse. Cadet Sanders He had joined the Ark crew with Myers, and her husband Myers had brought up her younger cousin, and wanted him off the streets. Millions of inhabitants on board the Ark. Job opportunities for Earth, Moon, Mars civilians to find jobs. The Expanse person was sponsored by either the Popsy Cola promotional marketing team, the Ark's owners, the Guarana drinks magnet owner had hired marketing third-party team, and contracted operative company called the firm. As if the Deep Space Voyager nicknames the Ark of Nowhere became an white elephant, meaning the guarana and popsy cola companies were going to try to make lemonade out of lemons and wash their hands of the fiasco. Some mileage was carried over the expanse. Before flood of illegal hackers saw the news, bad press was released about the Ark orphans living on spaceship called the Ark. Warden Mars and her baby cousin grew up in an Mars orphanage run by Sisters of the Infinites. Turning 18, she signed her cousin out of the facility. Older males would be sent out to find work in the crater mines owned by leaseholders. Backyard miners who were known to abuse the workers and make mistakes that cost fewer friends in leg or arm. One of those injured friends was a female chosen by female miner, in which an mining accident caused the girl in her first week to be sent back to the Sisters of Infinite. Officer Moore had been seeing this woman Zoe Chen, who was now an Fifi trickster illusionist. Sisters of the Light were older religious women whom came to live and die at the home. The order's Sisters Pan and Akers taught the talented children to connect with the audience, while busking on street corners, always hiding their identities away from roving public eye. The wardens on the Ark had been a mixture of people recruited on many surface colonies. Majority of the prisoners would live out their life on the Space Voyager, and were assigned jobs to carry out that allowed majority of the men to work in jobs they enjoyed. Gone were the days that people on board should be punished for their crimes. The Ark orphans over the generations of shipborne children had grown up, taken law classes. The preference to allow the prisoner to be given privileges stopped the early years of the Ark from repeating, where mutineers were shot dead and imprisoned in cells no bigger Brian's cube. In history of the warden office, one warden had gone missing, later to find genetic material in the waste compactor. To link the warden to some inmates who had eaten the deceased virtual programmer Fifi was used to bring some relief to prison staff and inmates' special treats. Warden's husband Bob Myers worked in the medical section, that was replacing the iron lung attached to Brian's cube. The story of unknown woman underneath the carriage came to her official notice when Officer Moore reported the information to the captain's board. And board of captains that were from several floors completed their meeting, and informed by Captain's vault lawyer that they could not enter the Brian's cube. It seems the papers had got hold of the story, in which she was to court-martial whomever sold the story, if it came from any of the Space Navy recruits and officers. One troublemaker was one of the Ark-born children who had formed the medieval illusionist gang. A number of the kids had been locked up in cells on her watch, damaging ship's property and breaking into sections that required access code. The inmates were allowed free access to areas that prevented others. Warden Mars was reading the bulletin about Gwendolyn to one of her prisoners through a door. The prisoner was known as the Wise Marquis of the Ark, and had been a judge in one of the moon colonies. His crime was killing his wife and her girlfriend, after he came home and found his daughter drowned in the bath. The two women were sipping drinks along the side of the pool, and the crime scene photos were leaked all over the spaceports. The reports were later changed to the judge, being under stress at work, jumping to conclusion and killing the women after his daughter was killed by an intruder and planted in the bath. The judge was given 2 life sentences made to carry out the life sentence over the expanse on the Ark voyage. Assigned all his wealth over to the stepdaughter who had been staying at the house. They never did find the intruder and the judge carried Ken for someone. The Wise Marquis looked out the window, at the virtual scene of enforced. Warden Myers had given him some good news about an space navigating machine that could been flown back to the Ark's last port. His contacts on the outside of the prison's unit had been fruitful. All he needed to do was create a nuisance of sorts with the Ark-born children to get a message out to the gang's leader, to find and drive her and fly the craft back to his homeworld. The number of years it would take to fly at the speed of light and be free. His intention was unknown yet, but the depression of destroying his family made him more intent to correct his failure as husband, and blame the two innocent women. The little bastard in charge of the medieval illusionist was an sociopath, as the ship was ripe with personality-flawed people. The Ark was an crazy mixed-up ship, full of chaos, karma, mutiny, Kali spirit. The warden jurisdiction laws did not cover people in floors under their own government. Lockouts were in place to opposition floor levels outside their zoned area. It's complicated to explain how the Ark in areas was no-go zone without offending Guildmaster's vault computer's common laws. The new world was going to be a mix of the old cultures and the new. Social welfare service workers got involved in the early stages in which many disappearances were logged onto Captain's vault files. The criminals under Warden Myers came from worlds under her control. The Asian group on one particular floor controlled the food market, and other smaller factions on floors sold the trinkets, game components. The fish and insect industry kept market owners in fresh produce. Open market poultry stalls were banned by LAWIT was a buyer's market to pay Guildmaster to hand over any wanted criminals. Warden Mars was best known back on Earth for her programming skills that helped to develop the Fifi Trickster software. Halfway through the voyage, she was woken up to serve 5 conscripted years. Myers had developed a program to ensure that her husband, cousin and Zoe Chan were awake now. Counter moves and strategies were met with thought, as she fed them our key information, which enables her to find the threats to other leads. Ark networks of the Ark's-born children had control issues from early age for some. Her own female mentors groomed her for this task of problem-solving. The Sisters of the Infinite groomed both her and Zoe Chan to lead the ship's revolution. A message from the Kia navigator Gwendolyn was delivered to her on the tattooed skin of the two men just received to lead New World Revolution, to bring the new laws to place of equal opportunity for people and the Ark's crew. The floor where the several women arrived were chosen for an purpose of the Sisters of the Infinite back on Earth. The replacement of the women picked by Asian Mafia were given to storage deep sleep unit to hold for 50 years and release the occupants into the future time period. By then the Asian Mafia group would have changed in enough places to forget about the human property. Sisters of the Light would come and pick up the women, and pretend to not know what happened to them. In case they approached the Mafia family, the person would be deep sleep again for another 50 years. The women chosen by Sisters of the Light were to spread a new religion, in which harmony between man and animal were to develop, so land would be put aside and protected on the new world. Warden Myers kept eye on all the political string pulling. Her duty was to make sure the new world would be a safe world.
What could be worse than this? Thought the man, to thinking a plan to go forward in his inner workings like a clock ticking, that was soon destined to be someone important. His mission in the new world in the future is much unknown. The deep space Voyager still has over 500 years travel to do. The biography journalist was filling in the gaps of Monowarda's life, which had been Rick and television classics that had been filled by producer on the Ark called Gantry. Movies that told of make-believe worlds, where the fighter took on some storylines that could have been perceived as Chinese-based folk stories. Titles of the episodes were The Man That Killed the Rhino Insect Demon, Hercules and the Monster from the Deep, The Wetapunga Queen and the Barbarian. Over 50 cult Ark-produced classics. The research would have to go way before the Ark started its trade. It was to get rich and set up his own school or learning, or get back into acting, as that was what he was most good at. Looking out the window of the expanse, which was endless space, Would have made the scene more scary if he could have seen that far, to look out the chamber's exterior window. At this time of night meant looking at nothing but specks of light that could be seen possibly as stars. He had found himself, alone in a cryo chamber, awakened and yelling for help. The people came and strapped him onto an table. In front of him was a camera, and the light above the tripod camera was blinking red on and off for the past hour. In the room to his right he could hear someone shuffling about and moving items. His sight was still blurred, but he could see shadows when someone was scraping the creamy substance off his skin and combing his hair. Exactly who was that bitch who'd slapped him after the doctors had cut that umbilical cord attached to his stomach? The mucky substance left globs of hard little and sticky balls that was still stuck to his teeth. He tried to blow it out his nostril. The nurse had sucked it out with one of those dentist suction hoses he'd seen that his last dental hygienist used. The injection they'd given him left him weak and drifting in and out of sleep. The overhead heater was warming him up from head to toe, and sheeted metallic material was covering his nakedness. And warm air was being blown into the room by wave and plastic cap with an opening that started to make a noise that was feeding one of his impaired scenes. That this wasn't right, he understood that there must have been some big accident. And he was in a medical treatment room the likes he had never seen before.
Doctors and nurses were talking in a dialect that he did not understand. He asked them to get an Australian consultant person to talk to him. Working in the mines in Western Australia, he must have had an accident and been flown to some country unknown to him. The last thing he recalled was pulling up beside a truck, which had stopped beside the highway. Two men had come up behind him, when he was asking the driver if he needed help to come and give him roadside assistance in the next town. A woman called Myers had told him that he was in Space Voyager, traveling midway between the old world and to the new one. He had taken and punched at her, when he was zapped by some electrical device. A malfunction in his crib had called for a medical team to remove the occupant, and Myers said he was one lucky guy. There had been thousands of these malfunctions. 10% death toll occurred here.
The Australian continent was 500 years travel distance away, and by now the Earth's ice age was well into winter, covering Earth's many oceans. Half covered in layer of ice and glaciers, the mining town of Kalgoorlie in Western Australia was no more. By the time Menawuta was placed in an floor section, his prior life was no more and could not be recovered one little bit. The arc was in between 2 points of time, in which traveling back or going forward would make little difference to the Wogan crew. The program on the set in front of Menawet told the epic story of how two worlds were unobtainable for a single man with no navigating spacecraft. The place for him now was the Ark of Nowhere, in which his blindness was also apparent. What choice did he have now? Freedom was now unobtainable, causing him much distress. Gantry's children and adult indentured guards took hold of Gantry's human.
Warden Myers came by with Spanish captain, and asked the captain to sponsor the newly recruited man to his deck. Manu, bearded and unkempt state, didn't put up too much of a good image for the captain to accept the warden's offer after the captain Digo was told there is little background information about Manus' conduct in earlier life. Captain Digo made some jokes about the Aussie. Maybe in few months, Captain Digo told Manu, when we see how you behave and deal with problems on board. Till then the warden can find you a room and job, and approach me later. Next thing, young teenager about 16 or 17 called Gantu came by, and asked the warden to let him see the actor Manuatu and offered to sponsor the man for next 3 months on board. Warden Myers was not a woman to take things too lightly, and gave herself time to make a decision. At the end of the rotation cycle, 24 hours later, Manuuda was sitting in a chair, when some kids came by in their teens, and took control of the situation, and started to brush his hair and plait his hair into a ponytail. He was given a pedicure and manicure. For those unfamiliar with those two terms, it's cutting your fingernails and toenails and using buffer to shave nails. Manuatu was given a set of shorts and shirt to wear. in which Warden Myers came by, and after seeing what the teenagers had proclaimed they would, Gantry spoke up, and told the warden to give Manu-Watu a job on his section. Myers took Manu aside, and told him the terms of his sponsorship, which was no more or less but slavery. You never leave your property on its own. If you're given a task to watch something, make sure you protect it and never let it out of your sight. Any punishment can be dealt out by your on-board sponsor, within reason. Don't be fooled by Gantry's age. He is an seasoned on-board civilian, and he has a lot of power behind him. Look the other way if you see another sponsored person being dealt with unfairly, as the Ark-born children protect their own, and will take matters into their own hands if one of them is hurt. But what you have to understand is that the younger girls and boys also need protecting from some of the group, and you can't trust any of them to watch your back if someone offers them to look the other way for in price. If you ever have any need to contact me, just send message and I'll arrange to see you in private. Gantry is the son of Deep Sleep Man in the Forbidden City on an section out of bounds for you and me. Gantry has to earn his entry, and what you have to concern yourself with is the situation you could put everyone else in, if something goes out of kilter, and you upset some. If something goes out of kilter, and you upset someone in the Forbidden City, protecting the Deep Sleep members. Take the sport boarding game components, and don't let anyone part you from it. The credit you win playing the fort board many games is what brings you wealth when you reach your end journey. Gantry is known to hurt people he perceives as threat, and if he tries to sell you drugs, never give in, as he's testing you. When you go to sleep, make sure you sleep on top of your fort board panel. The Ark's children want something out of this union, and it's not going to be something small. If you lose any credit of property that is not yours, you'll be indentured longer to pay it off. The Captain Digo and Gantry must shake on it to deliver you to that section floor in 3 months. And both Gantry and the Captain have some sort of arrangement I don't know about. Well, actually I do. But I'm not at liberty to say any more. Your arrangement on Gantry's floor also puts you out of my jurisdiction unless you're on floors that are governed by the Australian Asian continent. The room Gantry has arranged for you is to share your room with the smaller children that have just been forced to be abandoned by their parents. The children are the property of Gantry's section, and if he tells you to guard them, you guard them with your life. You do not have friends on board if you don't have sponsor, and Gantry can take away your sponsorship at any time. The lesson today that you should have known was that the Heron nails the children removed from the room were worth fort board components, and the credit could have been yours. Gantry has no tolerance for the group enclosed in the Forbidden City that's connected to modern vampire culture. The group enclosed in the Forbidden City that's connected to modern vampire culture that's about several hundred years old, in which they are not the harmless ones that came from United States continent and spread over the media way before back in 21st century. These are the Mars Moon vamps who took delight in body modifications and sight contact lens that killed their way to be a member of the group hardline organization to fear if he asks you to do anything that could cause an war between civilians and the other civilians that are connected to the vamps. The hit will put an life sentence onto you if you carry out the hit. I make in promise of this. Warden Myers and her team left the bay, and Gantry had been listening to their conversation and smiled. Manu-Watu was lead to the section, where his first job was to weed the garden, with the rest of the little kids under his care.
Fief and her merry men and women were travelling across the universe. Shakespeare once said to know or not to know, we're all a bunch of oddball crew members seeming our way to gamble with our ye old fort boards from the rich and bugger the poor. We're keeping the stack for ourselves. Fief and her merry men and women were travelling across the universe. The wary traveller better beware, or Fifi will steal fire smarts for our trickster. Fifi program is fabulous and mad. Put away your silver, put away your marbles and coin. We're making a mad dash across the expanse, filming clips to send back to old Earth.